Happy Friday! Welcome to Open Source Friday, where we talk to maintainers about the projects that they're maintaining. I am Kedasha, and thank you so much for being here with me today. We have some really good guests on today. I'm super excited to talk to Nick and Keegan about the GitHub SDK, because I've only been introduced to the SDK and used it like once in my time using GitHub. So super stoked to learn more about it. I also want to say welcome to the stream today. I hope you had a nice week. For me, it was pretty fast. It just went like this. But wanted to let you all know that the GitHub Universe call for sessions are open and they close on May 10th. So if you're ever interested, if you've ever been interested in speaking at GitHub Universe, now is your chance. Our topics are focused on AI, security, developer experience. And so if you have something cooking, if you have an open source AI project or like an AI project that you're building, AI is all the rage these days, or like an AI and security or AI security and developer experience, a triple threat brewing in your brain, be sure to apply to speak at GitHub Universe. You can, just pop into the search engine GitHub Universe, and the GitHub Universe 2024 page will pop up where you can apply to be a speaker. There are so many benefits of being a speaker, and I believe there may be like a stipend, and depending on where your session is, it will be recorded. So yeah, give it a go. There are some tips on the site, and we look forward to reading your submission. Now, let's get right into the stream. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Happy Friday. So we have Keegan and Nick Floyd here with us, and I am going to bring them up on stage. Hi.
Hey, Kedasha. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Way better than I deserve, that's for sure. Doing well.
Okay, so I'm pretty high energy, so I'm going to bring it down a notch. So tell us who you are. Let's start with Keegan. Keegan, who are you? What do you do at GitHub, and how long have you been doing it?
Well, first of all, Kedasha, thanks for having us on. We really appreciate the opportunity. We love to talk about what we do, and it's nice to talk, on this platform. So thanks for having us. Mm-hmm. My name is Keegan Campbell. I work with Nick on GitHub's SDK team, and are very happy to do so. I've been at GitHub for nearly 4.5 years now. The past year and a half of that has been on the SDK team. So I'm sorry, what were the other questions? Who am I? What do I do?
And how long have you been doing it?
Oh, gosh, I suppose I've been in the industry for 8 years now, I suppose. And a little over half
Wow.
of that has been at GitHub. Um,
Wow.
but my experience pales in comparison to Nick's, as you'll find out. Nick, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, I'm Nick Floyd. Like Keegan said, I'm on the SDK team with him. I've been at GitHub for about 3 years and some change. And part of that was on the API team proper, which I absolutely loved. And now I'm having a lot of fun with Keegan. And yeah, I've been in the industry for about 30 years. So
Woo!
I don't know if that's experience or just like just been there. Yes, sir.
Wow, that is impressive, Nick. What keeps you around in the industry with like all the changes over the past 30 years?
Wow. I have to say it's a solid question because it's changed over time, right? I jumped in because I thought it'd be cool. And like most engineers, I jumped in because I wanted to be a game dev like a long time ago, I was like, that's the best industry ever. And which, whatever. And then I just fell in love with APIs. Like I just had this obsession with APIs, and I started, building them and teaching people. And then as I realized that there was like this light that I could kind of just share with other people, and this excitement about what we do, and seeing other people light up, I think that's what really, really has kept me there. Because I also take opportunities to teach all my kiddos the same thing. I get a bunch of kids. I teach them how to program and do things like that. And just to see them light up when something happens, whether it's broken or not, I think that's what keeps me in this thing. I don't know.
Nice. Working in developer relations where it's very public and very community focused, I find joy doing the same thing, like seeing the bulb, sparkle in the eye when somebody says, I got it. I think I understand what's actually going on. It's so addicting.
Yeah.
It's so addicting. So even though I've been here for about like 4 years, I can relate. I can relate to that. But Keegan, 8 years is nothing to scoff at. I mean, so much has happened in 8 years, and super happy to have you here and super happy to have you at GitHub. So let's jump right into the project, right? Today we'll be speaking about the GitHub SDK. And I remember when I was just starting to get into developer relations, that's when I was first introduced to SDKs, and I was just like, what even is an SDK? So let's start from the very beginning. What is an SDK?
That's a great question. And perhaps I'll start here. So when you want to talk to another computer, you use something called an API, which is short for an application programming interface. Now you can do that yourself by writing like an HTTP client, or using something like curl or Postman, or any number of common interfaces to call these things. But that can quickly become unwieldy in the course of average application development. You have to handle a lot of things like creating your own models, serializing and deserializing these models, dealing with common problems like timeouts, rate limiting. There are things that have to be solved over and over again that quickly become a hassle to have to write from scratch each time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the SDKs come in. SDK stands for Software Development Kit, and it's a bit of code that is on the client side that makes calling an API a little bit easier, a little bit more ergonomic, and can provide helpers, tooling, and standardization, so you don't have to rewrite these things from scratch each time. Nick, do you have anything you'd like to add to that, or perhaps modify?
Yeah, no, that was a good description. I would just to annotate it with, traditionally, like when we look at APIs, like Keegan was saying, we think of things like REST API, like that are based on the RFC 2616 kind of protocols, and GraphQL and webhooks and eventing, and all those things are kind of almost like a data store for SDKs, if you will. But there's a lot of gaps in those things that, like Keegan was saying, that they can't really be addressed because those live on the server. Things like you were saying, like authentication. All of us have written. We've done a poor and probably good job of writing authentication about 1,000 times. copying and pasting and doing all that mess. But really, SDKs kind of abstract that stuff, like throttling, pagination, error handling, caching. All that stuff should really be opaque to the consumer because those are well-known things. They're documented, they're protocol-based. And so we can do some super interesting things on the client, like retain state, retry request, cache responses, that you can't do on the server. And so I think that's the superpower of SDKs. And I think that's why SDKs are kind of, and I'll say this, but I'll probably catch some flack for it, but like SDKs are kind of the new API, if you will, where you can do interesting things without having to kind of carry around the baggage of HTTP, like carrying around the baggage of authentication. You get kind of those things out of the box, hopefully, if done well. And then you can just focus on your business problem.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what I'm hearing is like an SDK is a way to interact with an API and just get to building without worrying about the setup. Because the setup
That's
is
exactly
in
right.
the SDK.
Yeah. You can speed up a lot of common coding scenarios with an SDK.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, when I first discovered SDKs, I was like, oh, this is actually pretty good. Because like the initial setup is often the same, even across project, because you're doing the same steps. So it's nice to just get into the code and just like build what you actually want to do. Great. So tell us about how did the GitHub SDK start, or like what is the past of the GitHub SDK? Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, so some of you may not know, back in March 2008, that was the introduction of the first version of our API, of GitHub's API, which was incredible, right? It was REST based. Some things, most things were done really well, and that was really good for the community. Later on, Octokit was introduced, I think around 2008. And that enabled things like apps and actions and just to express the API really well. And that's thanks, by the way, we're standing on shoulders of giants for each one of these. Gregor was instrumental and foundational in making that one happen. Later on, Octokit RB, so this is the Ruby based one. That was late 2009. And that's thanks to people like Win Netherland, Eric Berlin, and Catsby. Those individuals just again forerunners of some really great things that encapsulated a lot of like Keegan was saying, this accelerated development. And then in 2012, I believe, Octokit.net, so that's the .net version, of course, was introduced by Phil Hack and T-Clem. And that was really the primary use case for that was the Windows desktop app, when all that was kind of new and gyrating. And so that's, again, the past have really set the precedent for Keegan and I's current, and also enabled our future of what we're going to talk about a little later. And it's been incredible. It's been absolutely incredible because of these people and what they chose to do those years ago.
Yeah. Nice. Anything you want to add?
It's interesting to think, sorry, I'd like to add on to this. Brief period of context is those dates to me, 2008, 2009 doesn't seem like quite so long ago, but in the context of GitHub's history, this is like a year or two after the founding. We're talking about software that's been around basically since GitHub's inception, which is really quite something to think about.
Yeah.
That's so true. And I believe GitHub turned 10 this year. So it's a pretty big deal. So like, how old is the SDK? You said 2008. I don't remember, don't jag me, but when was GitHub's inception?
I think 2008, 2007, perhaps. Is that right, Nick?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so Octokit is around the same age as GitHub. That's awesome. So tell me about the evolution of the Octokit, Nick, and then maybe we can jump into like a demo of how you can get started using the Octokit. So like, what has the evolution of the SDK been like?
That's that's a near and dear to my heart. Because we were at a point where these things had lasted 10 years, right? And we had to make some choices. We had to make some decisions. This is a lot of software. We're talking about 78 repos. And we just, how do we support this? How do we love our consumers? How do we dive into this community? And for about a year there, I spent about 6 months of that trying to get these things back operational. Which is extraordinary to me. Just like Keegan was saying, you think about 2008, that almost seems like a drop in the bucket, but it really isn't. It's profound to me that this software operated well and was continuing to be delivered, again, thanks to people like Gregor and Wynn and Phil, all these people who decided to design this really, really well, enabled our current, which once we got all these things back up and running, we got them shipping again, everybody was smiling. We had green check marks, all the CIs were cheering. It took off. It was insane. We started seeing. We currently see packet, and all this is public information, by the way. But we see package downloads of 115 million a week.
Wow.
We have 2,300 open source contributors across these repos.
Wow.
4.5 million aspects of software depend on Octokit. It's absolutely incredible, and that came because of our amazing community, and it came because of this choice to, like, we're going to make this what it should be. We're going to kind of resurrect it and then bring it into the future. And again, we've had about 8 languages. Currently active is about 4 current languages, and then we have 2 brand new fully generated SDKs that we're trying to GA. And then the community, just as an earmark for the community here, they've created about 48 different SDKs in different languages on their own. Wow. And so it's such a vibrant community, which I so love. And so that's where we are. That's where we are right now.
That is crazy. I can't even fathom those numbers. But like, okay, so somebody just asked in the comment, which is what I was just gonna say. Like, how do you manage the stress at those levels? Like, how are your stress levels, and also, like, how are you, organizing and maintaining the project at such a, at such a magnitude level? Like, what does that look like?
Oh gosh. First of all, that's a fantastic question. I think the short answer is we're never done. We don't have a process that we're like, this is complete. This is something, we're very happy with, and this is like something we're just going to roll with. There's always a level of self-examination. There's always a period of, okay, what can we change? How can we make this better? How can we alter it? So between Nick and I, this is just 2 people. We have in the Octokit organization over 70 repositories, and we see, gosh, my GitHub notifications, if I go on vacation for a week, I have over 1,000 of those notifications that I got to wade through when I come back, so the volume is just tremendous. And so between just the 2 of us, there's a lot of, it's just a deluge, that we have to keep up with. So this is something we're always working on adapting to, and we're always trying to get better, because the other aspect of it is we have to balance this, keeping up the status quo with what do we want for the future, because we have all of these wonderful visions of where we'd like to take SDKs, how we want things to pan out in the future, what is our ideal world for the SDKs. And we need to make meaningful progress towards that while not leaving our current situation, completely out in the cold. We have to be able to respond to those issues and PRs. And so what we've landed on currently is a procedure where we have like a first responder rotation, where one of Nick and I will, during the week, take a couple days and respond to those notifications. We have a board that we work through and a review process there. But this is something that's always under investigation and something that we're always working on improving just between ourselves.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'd like to add to that too, is that there's an aspect of candor and honesty. Like we get really, we have really serious moments where we're just like, let's be honest with ourselves. We can't do this, and we got to be okay with not being able to do something that we really want to. But and that's whether that's in favor of trying to love and support the community, or it's in favor of trying to make something better for the community through our project vision. We we're trying to get really good at being okay with not being able to do something, for sure. And
That's
Keegan
so
runs a
true.
lot. He runs a whole bunch. So, like that's very relaxed. I've got 9 kids. I don't get stressed out.
Oh, wow, Nick, nine children is quite a bit to manage. In addition to the Octokit, ever evolving. But that's good. That's good though. But what I'm hearing is there is a process in place to make sure that it doesn't get too overwhelming, right? If ever there's that moment of overwhelm, it's always nice to know that to like take a step back and rely on processes. And it sounds like, okay, there's at least some processes in place to deal with, especially the notifications of GitHub. So let's take a look at the GitHub SDK, right? So I know, Keegan, you have a demo for us on how we can get started with the GitHub SDK?
Sure. Yeah. And I'd like to do a very brief intro before this. Nick had mentioned earlier about, he touched on us introducing 2 generative SDKs that we'd like to introduce when we're working on making generally available. The current Octokit SDKs, well, most of them, some of the JavaScript content we have is automatically generated, which is wonderful. The fact of the matter is there are so many engineers at GitHub doing so much excellent work on the GitHub API that Nick and I can't keep up manually adding coverage to all of the SDKs across Ruby, across .NET, across JavaScript, etc. So we're looking for solutions to help manage this problem and also to cover other additional languages because, for example, GitHub has a huge profile of its user base that's very into Python or that's very into Java, for example. And so we want to cover additional users and also, do a better job of covering the surface area of the SDKs that we have existing. And so we're looking for generative solutions that will automatically keep up with GitHub's SDKs. And so we have alpha versions of a .NET SDK and a Go SDK that we are working on making generally available sometime later this year. But the alpha versions have been released on .NET. You can check it out on NuGet. On Go, there's no centralized package manager, but you can go get it. And so this demo I've prepped is a little basic Go demo using our Alpha Go SDK, where we'll pull down that dependency and then go get make a call to GitHub's API. Now, Kedasha, have you ever heard of the Zen of GitHub?
No. What is that?
If you go to GitHub's API reference, there's an endpoint called the Zen of GitHub. I think it's just like api.github.com/Zen, where there's these, I think there's 12 of these things that are like Zen principles, I guess, that have been around forever. And they say deep things like avoid administrative distraction and, like
fail
encourage
quickly.
flow. Yeah. Things like that, And so that's the example I'd like to use here is calling that endpoint to get a random Zen principle.
Cool. The Zen principle I just got is responsive is better than fast.
There you go. That's a good one.
So good.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully you're looking at a Visual Studio Code window.
Yes.
And hopefully it's like big enough to be legible text-wise.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So right now I'm just in a blank directory, and the first thing I'm going to do is run go mod init. And so what we do here is initialize a new Go module. And the argument that we provide to this is the name of the module. I'm not going to check this in, but I'm still going to go with a convention of, source control owner /name /repository name, which I'm calling Open Source Friday Demo. So we see we've created a go.mod file, gives the module name and the Go version. That's all great. And then I'm going to create a main.go file. Now this will be blank. And the first thing I always do whenever I create a main.go file is just run a super basic hello world example, just to make sure, like, is my compiler working? Like, is everything set up fine, or is something funky going on? So I'm going to just print out here, hello open source Friday audience, and then a new line. And then we're going to make sure that this thing compiles. And I'm going to run main.go, and you'll see hello open source Friday audience is printed out. So that's all good. Okay, so now we're going to get into the interesting piece. What we want to do now is pull down the dependency, the actual, Octokit, the reason we're here and the reason we're talking about it. So the command for that is go get, and the repository is github.com/octokit/go SDK. And you'll notice that we haven't released a major version. So, until we do that, we might make some breaking changes. But I encourage you to pull it down, play with it. Please come see us on the repository issues and pull requests and talk to us. We'd love to hear from you. Nick and I really love the community engagement and talking about it. And the other thing we need is a abstractions library provided by our friends at the Microsoft team Kedasha. This is what our generative SDK is built on top of. This team is full of wonderful people. They're very sharp, and this tooling is incredible. So it powers our generative SDKs. We want to give a big shout out to the Microsoft team at Kedasha, and we're pulling down their abstractions library here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add some actual code here. I'm going to make a run function that returns an error. And at the end, I'm going to say return nil just to keep the compiler happy. Okay, now the first thing I want to do here is go ahead and give ourselves a client. And typically in Go, anything that can return an error will, and then you'll have to handle that error. So I'll take a client and an error, and then we're going to need to add the imports to our file. I'm going to call this SDK, and then add the import for Octokit/Go SDK, and the directory here is package. And then I'm also going to add the import for the abstractions library. And just because I'm lazy and I don't want to type abstractions over and over, I'm going to call this abs.
Abs.
Yeah. And this is Kedasha abstractions go, I believe is what it is. Okay, cool. So you'll notice VS Code gives me this awesome IntelliSense now. And the method I want is new API client. We might talk later about function options here, but for now, the defaults are fine. I'm not providing any initialization to this. I don't need initialization for the Zen endpoint. You don't have to be logged in. GitHub will provide Zen to anyone. And then if error is not equal to nil, we're just going to go ahead and return the error. And then up here, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I call this. So I'll say if error is equal to run and the error is not equal to nil. And then I'll call log.failf. Could not run application or something. That's not a very helpful error message, but this is just a demo. So what are you going to do? Okay, so now that we have our client, we need to actually use this thing. In all of our Kedasha generated SDKs, there's two aspects that go into each SDK call. One, you need query parameters. This would be familiar to anyone making an API call, like anything you'd put in a query, I guess in this case, there's nothing because the Zen endpoint is so simple. Our query parameters are going to be blank. And the other thing is a request configuration. In our SDKs, the request configuration is an object that holds headers and the query parameters and other, object related or request related objects that we can jam any form of customization in. So I'll go ahead and create a variable for our query params. Not params. I always type params with a variable name, but I spell it parms, and then I start thinking about chicken parmesan, and then I get, I don't know if this happens to anybody else. Okay. Anyway, so we're going to just take some empty default query parameters, and then we're going to create our request configuration. Apps.request configuration. And then we're going to provide, these brackets are for Go generics, which is kind of fun. That's not something I had used a whole bunch before this. It's a pretty new language feature, but it's neat to use it. Okay, so we define our query parameters, which in this case are blank. If we were, for example, getting a list of repositories, you might say, I want all the public repositories, or I want all the repositories I get because I'm an org member of, the GitHub org or something like that. Like those would be common query parameters. Other things that could go in a request configuration, you'll see headers, you'll see other request options, etc. Okay, so now that we have our request configuration and our query parameters, it's time to actually make the request. The Zen is what we're getting back. And because it's Go, we're getting back an error because we pass around errors everywhere. Then we actually take our client, call client.zen.get, and then we pass in a context. I'm just going to use context.background because this isn't like a real service. We don't have a real context for passing around. And then we pass in the request config. If there's an error, we're just going to return it where our application will force quit. Otherwise, we're going to printf our Zen. And because the Zen here is a pointer to a string, I'm going to dereference it here with the star operator and then return nil. And we're getting a compiler error here because I have not Go mod tidied. Go likes our modules to be tidy. It really likes to keep a clean house. Okay, so if I run go run main.go here, you'll see anything added dilutes everything else, which is a nice principle from GitHub's API.
Nice.
So it's really quite simple to pull down the SDK. It can go quite quickly. One other brief thing I'd like to talk about before moving on is these options here. Like, for example, if you wanted to provide an authorization token, or say you wanted to call a different like GHES endpoint or something like that, you can provide those options in the client. So you could say, hey, I'm going to provide a GitHub token here, and pass that into the client, and then every request would be authenticated, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that is our demo. You can check it out by running github.com/octokit/go SDK.
Nice. Or you could go to the Octokit site and click on the Go SDK. And that was pretty cool. That wasn't too bad.
My favorite thing about that was, Keegan, you didn't write one line of authentication code.
Yes.
Like, I'm sold. We're gonna, we're gonna invest. I don't know.
So are you looking for contributors to any of the SDKs? I'm sure you have a lot, but is there anything specific that you're looking for from the open source community?
That's great.
I think go ahead, Nick.
No. I was gonna claim that again, to the earlier point, we've got a lot of patterns and practices that you can read about in the root of the repo about how to get started. A great place to get started is we have a first good up for grabs and first good issue on all our repos. And so if you ever see any of those, they're really simple things like either docs, or they can be very complex things like caching that people have asked for. But we have a great deal of trust in our community. You just have a deep love for them because they're wanting to give their time to help so many other people. And that's the reason I gave a lot of the statistics up front, is because there are so many people that get impacted by the code that you change in Octokit. I just want to encourage the community. There's millions, literally millions of people that get changed. by this code. And so we really appreciate the participation. And again, the best way to get started is we can go to the root of the repo, root of the organization, whack Octokit, read more about that there, and then also just kind of pepper through the repos, looking for that up for grabs tag that we have. Anything there is up for grabs, obviously.
Nice. That's awesome. And we have a question from our audience. Billy says, when should we expect to see a Python version? And is this a question that goes into like the future of GitHub SDKs?
Yeah, it certainly is. Python is definitely on our radar. After Go and .NET, Python is just based on GitHub's usage profile.
Imminent.
Python is one of the largest, languages of GitHub users. So it's foremost in our minds, and we're looking to expand that way. We don't have, I can't give you a date. We can't promise anything. It's just Nick and I, and we've got a pretty jam-packed schedule, unfortunately. But we're looking to move that way, certainly.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, cool. Nick, I know you wanted to talk about the future state of GitHub SDKs.
Yeah. So, what Keegan showed is just a sampling of what could be, what is actually right now. We used to say what could be because it didn't exist, but now it does. Thanks to our friends from Microsoft and Kyoto, and then also just thanks for, to all the work in the community. So what does this mean? What does generative SDKs mean? What does that bring to the forefront, and what does that afford us? I know from personal experience, Keegan and I have both. He alluded to some of the notifications. He's right. Our notifications fill up to about 3,000 strong every couple of weeks. Goodness. And but again, we have some patterns and practices, and we have to kind of be ruthless with what we do and what we don't do, and it's a constant growing experience. But that does help us understand what people need. So out of this huge pool of millions of downloads, what should we focus on? That's a really big question, right? And we get hung up on what we want, and we get hung up on what the organization needs, and so really a huge part of how we make our decisions is what is the community asking for? Yeah. We do a lot of ear to ground kind of stuff, and we just watch and understand what people need, which is I have to laugh about the Python question. We did that. We looked at what languages are most used, and we're like, this makes sense. Which thanks whoever asked that question. Thanks for affirming that. But again, we can't. Keegan and I can't do this. We'll run ourselves ragged. And so we have to really lean into these things like generative aspects, predictive technologies, and what we're hoping that the future of this whole SDK thing is we're hoping to do it in such a way that we abstract the mundane, right? So we do the default stuff good, right? We cover the whole surface of the GitHub SDK so that people, two things: one, don't have to continue implementing them by hand, and two, get exactly what they need no matter what they need. So if GitHub provides it, we provide it, right? Nice. And then now that we've kind of pushed that aside, we start asking questions like, how do we do rate limiting, and how do we do caching and error handling and pagination? How do we get those types of feature sets into the SDKs? And so those are also future concerns that are being poured in. And by the way, we feel our users should get by default. Those should be the gimmes. So once all that stuff's kind of pushed out of the way, now the question is so what do people actually need? They tell us what they need, and they ask for things. But if we can dig in a little deeper and kind of get the meta narrative underneath that message, what is that meta narrative? And oftentimes we find out that there's some very interesting workflowy kind of things that people need. We start seeing these kind of pictures manifest through request cycles, right? We don't know who's doing the request, but we can observe how requests are being made and what endpoints are being made, and so really what we want to jump into feet first is this aspect of maybe some generative plugins or workflows that will help us help users get things done right out of the box. So that one Zen endpoint that Keegan called, that could be create project. Something as simple as that. And then you get everything you need. What if you don't know what you need, but you want to ask the question, right? And so integrations maybe and this doesn't exist. This is all hand wavy, and I get it, but this is on our hearts. But maybe
Yeah.
there's some Copilot things where we say, hey Copilot, I don't exactly know what I need, but I think I need a project page that lists out all the PRs, and I need to be able to add tags to all of them so that I can understand, so I can give my project manager this template thing or whatever. The most amazing thing that I think that we've discussed, and Keegan will start doing this number, but if I'm saying too much, but we really picture this thing as this kind of like SDKs for everyone, right? So
Yeah.
why just engineers using SDKs is a perfect use case for the current state of things. But what about PMs who want to generate applications that they want to get a look and feel of something before they start asking engineers to build something? What if you could do a series of SDKs that would generate components and API calls that are on the back end and provide data right up front that would manifest an application for you just by one line of asking Copilot, generate me this thing. Here's my project plan. Though that's where we're looking. That's where our sights are. Is that why are we going to be limited by language? Why are we going to be limited by the need for constantly updating this API surface? Because in the future we could be doing things like language agnostic SDKs. We could be doing things like AI hydrated SDK, that don't exist. So no code SDKs.
Wow.
Yeah, and so we talk a lot about. If anybody wants to read more, we talked a lot about this on our discussions inside of Octokit. But those are the interesting things that Keegan and I are like, oh, this is the technology exists. Why shouldn't we leverage it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the reason is because of time, right?
Yeah.
All that sounds really, really amazing. And Eduardo had a very interesting question in the chat. Essentially, this question is saying like, how are the needs from different communities different? So like he said like the Python SDK may be used in notebooks and Go Rust in the CLI because like the needs from each community may be different. So like how do you handle like the different needs from each programming community?
That's a great question. That's not something I feel like we do incredibly well right now, to be honest. So we have, to some extent, like our JavaScript repositories are broken up. They're very modular. This is because the JavaScript ecosystem tends to like its repositories very small and single purpose. Other projects and packages are all, just like one lump sum essentially. So that, I guess, is one respect of how we're respecting each ecosystem's preference. But outside of that, we're not doing a ton. I think in my world, there's a lot that I'd like to bring to each SDK first to level them before I'd like to consider, what can we do differently for each SDK. And these are the aspects that Nick was talking about earlier, your rate limitings, your throttlings, your authorizations. Do we support GitHub apps and everything? Do we support OAuth? Do we support personal access tokens? We don't do an amazing job of like supporting everything equally across all of our SDKs as is. So I'd like to start there before we get into like, how can we keep things, unique to each ecosystem. That being said, I can see a vision in which, I don't know, perhaps in Go, there's something more specifically CLI related, or like we could provide some sort of hooks or like flagging or I don't know, something that would make it easier, for example, to use in that context. I think that's a fantastic question. I don't have a
really good question.
Nick, would you like to add to that?
Well, Keegan, you highlight kind of one of the challenges of our job is that we have to kind of be language experts and in many languages. which is something that I appreciate so deeply about our Kyoto friends. So those are our Microsoft friends who built the generative tool. Is that really takes a lot of the load off of us. And I think one of the superpowers that we're going to gain from that is that when we design a feature, let's say rate limiting, for instance, that's top of mind. Like whenever we design that for like one SDK, the porting to the other SDKs is almost a non issue, right? It's like should be a very simple, because it's patternized. Like we've committed, Keegan and I have these fundamental things that we commit to, being patternized. We commit to making sure that our approaches are robust and acceptable to the community. All these things, like our motto or whatever. And so that's exactly what Keegan's saying, which I love. Is that it's the future for language abstraction here is huge, and we get the benefit of providing not just features in one SDK, but all of them. And we also add to that, you provide the entire GitHub API surface to all of them, and without much effort, I guess. Is that right? Am I saying that right? It's still effort, but it's not too much.
Cool. Okay, so as we get to wrap up, I wanted to ask one kind of lighter question. So what's your favorite hidden gem or lesser known feature in Octokit?
So good. Hidden gem. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, I'll start, I guess. So one of the things, and this is like a personal story, I guess, one of the things that brought me to the SDK team was I started working on GitHub's Terraform provider as a side project. And then I began an attempt to sell that to the organization as like hey, we should support this, during work time. Terraform is a software product made by a company called HashiCorp. It's an infrastructure as code thing. The Terraform provider for GitHub is like a GitHub SDK that interacts with Terraform. So it's like you write Terraform code, essentially like code in air quotes. It's like not a full featured language, but a description of what you want. Yeah. And then you run it, and then it will create a repository for you, or like a GitHub team, and give it permissions to the repo or whatever. And that project has been going for maybe 7 years or so. Wow. And it's like a lesser known little brother to the GitHub SDKs. And it's used by a lot of large companies, especially useful for enterprises that are very bought in on Terraform, like for other reasons. A lot of companies like to use Terraform to manage everything. And so they're just like, okay, this is our chosen infrastructure as code tool. Nice. That's what we're going to do. And so because it started as, something I did for fun, it's got a little bit of a special place in my heart. And so that is my, I don't know, my hidden gem.
Your Easter egg, I think you would say. That's awesome.
Yeah.
If you're into Terraform as your infrastructure as code thing, check out the GitHub Terraform provider.
Nice. That's definitely unexpected. I would have never guessed that, to be honest. Cool. I mean, I think that's all we have today, unless you have anything else you would like to say to folks.
Just thank you to our contributors. Thank you so much for just being here and showing up.
Nice. So thank you for joining us today, everyone. I hope you learned something new. Make sure you check out the GitHub SDK at the link that is on the screen. But thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of Open Source Friday. Thank you, Keegan and Nick, for being here with us today. And I shall see you next week. Bye.